So I'm actually a tad nervous because I just realized I never actually cleared this with my Patreon subscribers to see if they'd be okay with this necessarily. But I figured there should be a free episode periodically in this series to promote its existence and all that to all the people that are outside of the Patreon ecosystem to know that this is happening. Hey guys, welcome to the Q&A series. This is a series I do on a weekly basis for Patreon, and here, episode 25, I'm putting out publicly so that it can, you know, be a known thing. So this is 25 of episodes that are like 90 to 120 minutes ish on average. So there's a backlog at this point. No, it didn't take me that long to get only level 34 in Modern World of Warcraft. The first half of the series was Diablo 2 until I switched for reasons that would become apparent if you saw. That was a mess. So this is just a thing where I take questions from my Patreon and I just kind of ramble podcast style. This kind of is my podcast, my solo podcast, now that all of my other podcasts have systematically failed. And the most recent one being that Andrew moved, and we could sometimes do a Skype call here and there. Wow, I reflexively say Skype even though I've never used Skype for that purpose really. Discord call, which we've done twice now, but it's infrequent. I don't have the weekly podcast I used to have and all that, so this is kind of replacing that, but only for patrons, which was not the plan. I wanted to do both at the same time, but then Andrew moved. It was unrelated. And if you're wondering why now, this is actually going to be almost immediately apparent why this particular episode is going to be the public one and not the private Patreon one when we get to our first question. So Levrikon asks, what are your thoughts on Article 13 of the European Copyright Directive, which passed through Parliament recently? If these changes were to be finalized, it looks as though, to protect themselves, YouTube would likely apply extremely aggressive copyright filters to users in Europe, as well as to European content like games from developers such as CD Projekt and Daedalic Quantic Dream. Do you think this is likely just another SOPA/PIPA type affair which ultimately never materializes? If it were to come into effect, what percentage of your audience typically reside in Europe and would not be able to watch a majority of your content without the use of a VPN? Let's go ahead and just get to the stats right away, because I've prepped them. I did prep time. Haha. Ta-da! So that's my stats for the last 30 days. Well, 28 days, I guess. I don't know why it's on 28. Usually it's 30, I think. That's my population breakdown of my viewership by country. As you can tell, since they have the check marks next to them, the ones that are from the EU are a lot of the top ones. That said, none of the countries make up a huge percentage of my viewership except the United States, which is very large. Like that right there is the UK, and the United States is 7 times as large. So as long as I have my United States viewership at the bare minimum, I'm not totally sunk, because they're like half of my viewership. But yeah, collectively the EU makes up I think more than 25% of my viewership, and that's not great news overall. Admittedly, this is a confusing gray area. I've heard that at the moment UK is still affected by this kind of decision, but you know, there's a whole thing happening with the British people and the European Union that has muddied the waters there, and so on. But that's the vague breakdown. Basically, the UK today makes up 8% of my population, 7% is Germany, and then there's a bunch of other little pie slices that all make them eventually add up to about like 26% or something like that. So very much not good news, basically. So if you're not caught up on this subject, first of all, I heavily encourage you to do additional research, because I'm just going to be going off the top of my head for the most part. This is not a video essay. Also, that's one of the things that are threatened. Haha. It's not good news. So basically, they're trying to create a system that will protect copyright holders so that people will be adequately compensated for use of their materials, and it protects people and artists and so on. And it's all actually like a very reasonable it's a very reasonable idea and desire, but the way they're going about it is incomprehensibly confusing and misguided and largely just points at this idea that like, oh, right, they kind of just don't know anything about the modern internet or anything about that. And that makes sense because a bunch of old politicians that make up the EU members, it's not the greatest people to be deciding how internet policy should be working. It also gets into a lot of international messes where we don't really know what to think about a lot of these elements, because basically the biggest change that's happening right now is that as it exists right now, if you upload copyright content to the internet, to YouTube and so on, the ID system will match the fact that said content is is a match, as the content ID system you always hear about and so on. And basically the onus is on the two people involved. Like, the YouTube kind of is uninvolved, and they just facilitate the matching system and putting these people in touch with each other so that the copyright holder is aware of their copyright being potentially infringed upon, and then that copyright holder can send a takedown notice to have the video taken down, or they can enter revenue sharing or even claiming, where they either take away the money, they take away the ad revenue from the person that made the video, which is the thing I constantly deal with, or they share the revenue, which sometimes happens but not very often, or they just block the revenue and so on. Like, there's a bunch of different things you can do between that are a spectrum from like blocking the content entirely to claiming the ad revenue from the content. And it's all clumsy and it's all frustrating, and if you know about fair use and so on, at least in the United States, it's kind of a mess even in its current form, in how like the copyright holder has such priority that they can just claim your content and just hold on to it even if you are doing something that falls under fair use. And even if you don't think Let's Plays fall under fair use, video essays like really definitely do, because they fit the textbook definition of like the premise of fair use. And those people constantly have to deal with the fact that like people will just claim their content, and then when you're like, wait, hang on, this is a video essay, this is fair use, like this is commentary and analysis and critique, they're like, nah, because they could just say no when you appeal with the facts about the thing. That's a whole mess. And then there's also the whole fun thing where like people will like upload their let's play, their let's plays will then fall under like a multi-channel network, and the multi-channel network will be like, hey, all this content belongs to this let's player. I'm like, no, it doesn't. They're playing a video game. Like, yeah, we're gonna claim everyone who ever played this game. I'm like, they didn't make the game. You can't even. They don't own the game. Like, that happened with me with Jacksepticeye. I got videos claimed and blocked and so on because Jacksepticeye did something with the network, and the network was like, yeah, Jacksepticeye owns all the content in these videos, right? I'm like, no, he's talking over the thing. So like, the current system is a mess and does need revising. But this current thing that's happening is actually not really a revise of that. It's just an additional new problem that we get to deal with. And I would definitely take the old system over the new here. Basically, they're just saying, you know what we're going to do is, instead of the YouTube being just a mediator and the people being responsible, because as it is right now, the person who uploads copyright content is the one that's responsible for said content. So if it does go, what happens when you dispute a copyright claim on YouTube is that you get this very long thing where they have like 30 days to respond, and then they can be like, nah. And then you can then take them to court. Like, that's literally like what YouTube says to do next. Like, YouTube is like, well, if you guys can't figure this out, I guess you're gonna have to resolve it through legal means. And I'm like, shit, that escalated quickly. Which is why a lot of YouTubers are afraid to dispute copyright things after the first little like please, which is our first tool, because the next step is supposed to take what's often a larger company, or even a company at all compared to us, to the courts in order to prove our rights and so on. But the upside of that is that if the onus falls on us, then at least that means that the platform itself isn't constantly filtering and censoring everything. Because what's happening now is that Article 13 is like, it's claiming that websites like YouTube that host content those guys are the ones that are responsible for all the copyright content on their website, and they're the ones, I keep forgetting to cut these bodies up. Those are the ones that need to be held responsible. Those are the ones that those are the ones that are liable if somebody's mad their copyright's being infringed on their platform, which is kind of a problem when you have something like YouTube, which, you know, has like 1 million hours of content uploaded every hour or something absurd like that. Like every time they say the number, it's impossible to remember because it's so like catastrophically Lovecraftian scale and its incomprehensibility of like the mass of content being uploaded at all times. And so this is there's actually somebody put I'll probably link this in at the end of the video as like a title card, some of the videos I was referencing. But someone actually made the good point of like when they went to the YouTube HQ years ago and they filmed on HQ campus, on YouTube campus, they had to like fill out forms to prove that they had legal rights to the people in the videos, any content used in the video, the logos on their shirts, and so on, because the moment it was physically on YouTube campus, that was when suddenly YouTube was like, well, it's here, so now we're liable for the copyright content of this video. So even though you're an independent YouTuber, because you made a video at our HQ, you have to prove you own the rights to every single element of said video, or you can't use it. And they ultimately put it to the legal team, and then to like pass to the YouTube legal team to try to tell whether or not they were allowed to upload it ultimately. And after they signed all the forms and filled out everything, and then they were denied and they didn't get to use the video. Like that's kind of the restrictiveness that happens when you, instead of making it so that YouTube's just a mediator, make YouTube directly liable for all of the content on its entire website, is that's just going to mean that YouTube has to manually police everything, which basically means everyone's fucked. Like independent creators won't get their content. Not only will they probably not get their content approved, they probably won't even get their content reviewed, like even looked at, because there's so much content that has to be manually policed, and not just like at a glance, like people being like, oh, like the current system when they talk about like, is it advertiser safe, is like a person can kind of you can just hire random people to kind of like glance through it and kind of be a judge, and you know, and that's kind of what they do. Like a lot of, like when it comes to policing adult content on Facebook and YouTube and stuff like that, a lot of these companies just hire somebody from like India, like just a lot of people from India to manually check through all the content and see if it's like, is there boobs in this, is there gore in this, and stuff like that. And that generally it works. But my impression is that if you need to physically, if you have to prove rights to absolutely everything in a video, that requires a manual review from somebody that actually knows what they're talking about and is trained and is maybe even skilled labor themselves, and like there's a whole process to that. And so like YouTube would probably only be willing to work with the companies, like cable companies, talk shows, all those other people that actually just have their own teams that vet all this stuff. And so big companies that are feeding content in and out of the EU are probably going to be fine, but all the actual content creators that are the basis of, you know, YouTube as a platform basically might be totally sunk. And this is not, I mean, I would love for this thing to blow over and be like a whole joke and everything, but like so far, like we have like the heads of YouTube coming out and saying like, yeah, we're gonna basically have to treat YouTube, we're gonna have to treat EU as like a bubble where all the rules change, and like content can't come in or out unless it's very specifically and carefully mediated. Because if they just let the content come in and out at whatever rate, then like if it's not regulated, then every single piece of copyright content there now YouTube's liable for it, and that's not something that they're going to be willing to go through. So it's bad. It's bad for viewers in the EU, and it's even worse for content creators in the EU, because viewers are most likely going to have an incredibly filtered version of this, what is basically a large portal of the internet. Like entire chunks of the internet are going to be heavily regulated, and you're going to find that you just can't access the kind of content you used to unless it's through like vaguely illicit means, or maybe VPNs will work out or stuff like that. But like for a lot of people, like a lot of stuff's gonna be blocked, which is not great for like the flowing of information and so on. Like that's kind of worrying when it comes to like how news and culture and information flows on the internet, to have entire chunks of the world just have it cut off and censored and so on. It's hard not to think a little bit of like China and North Korea, a little bit with elements of that, and it's not as severe, but it's certainly worse than what was already here. Yeah, viewers are likely going to have a completely filtered version because this and the system's already in place. Like whenever I get a copyright claim on a video, the vast majority of the time nowadays, all that happens is it just says, hey, you don't get the money for this one. I'm like, thanks. Good thing I have 10,000 videos, because this happens all the time. But the much worse the thing is that I can see, like, if a thing gets blocked in a particular country for its music or whatever, like what happened with part 1 of Quadrilateral Cowboy or part 1 of Uru and stuff like that, it'll be like, this video is blocked in Germany and Denmark and Australia or whatever. Like, it'll have a list of countries that it's blocking it in. So YouTube already is equipped to block videos in specific regions while allowing it to be viewed everywhere else. And so it'll be, if they have to do this, it'll actually be very easy to just flip the switch and be like, yeah, all this content that's not carefully vetted, like Netflix or something, all the stuff that hasn't been manually reviewed, it's just not available in any of the EU member countries anymore. And they could just do that, and it'd be very easy to implement ultimately. And then they'd have to have like a manual flagging system of like which stuff is exempted from that block, basically, which would likely just be like BBC and like any content related to that and so on. It's a real not good look. As far as members of, when I talked about like members of the EU as in like content creators that live there, it's not great because as it is right now, like you have to, based on the text they have so far, which admittedly, this is a weird in-between state. Like, this is basically already happening. This has basically already been approved. It's basically already supposed to happen. And they're just nailing down the exact language of it, which means that it's kind of already going on. Is that the enormous? That is the enormous. Kill the enormous. When I talk about content creators within the country itself, like, they have to, under this text, they have to basically be able to prove that they actually own the rights to every single piece of content featured in the entire thing, which means fair use doesn't apply. None of that matters. It doesn't matter if you're being transformative or any other element. It doesn't matter if it's critique. It doesn't matter if it's commentary. In particular, I'm really bothered by the fact that like I create let's plays, sure, which are this, but the primary content that I consume on YouTube is not let's plays, it's video essays, which you will quickly realize if you watch my Keith's recommended videos playlist, which is like 400 videos long now, but they're almost exclusively video essays, and that is also a form of content that is heavily going to be impacted by this kind of regulation if it is meted out in the way that it's being said to. But if you live within the EU, like, I don't know what they're going to do. They'll likely block you from uploading absolutely anything that has any kind of content in it that might be copyright on any level. If they can find even a hint of it anywhere in your video, you'll probably be blocked. Although if they might even go more severe, because they might not fully trust their own content ID system to fully catch everything, so they might just block people from those countries from uploading to YouTube at all, because they can't verify that their content is actually safe for their website, and because YouTube's liable for everything they do. The moment that YouTube's liable for everything is the moment where all of this content then has to be manually reviewed by experts, because they don't want to be held liable. Which is why, like, yeah, it'd probably just be like the BBC and other companies that are trusted by YouTube, and maybe certain very large YouTubers that have a certain amount of clout might be able to like set up a meeting with YouTube and have a particular like agreement about what they are allowed to and not allowed to show in their videos, and agree to proceed accordingly, and then maybe those people will be able to move forward. But I imagine that a large number of YouTubers will just maybe just vanish overnight. YouTubers that want to work around this system, I would imagine, would probably end up moving to the United States, as like there's already so many English and European YouTubers that end up moving to the United States, specifically Los Angeles, and so that's only going to further increase that glut of all YouTubers moving to Los Angeles all the time. But if you have to work, you'd probably want to try to look into getting a work visa to work for YouTube content in the United States, which is further, like, we're talking about this constant thing of like what people can afford to do. It creates an inequality that is kind of against one of the appeals of internet content, is that there's a democratization of all this. There's a low point of entry. Like, one of the struggles of making a Let's Play channel, for example, is that how do I put this? What I do has a very low barrier for entry. The technology is easy to access, the equipment is easy to access, a microphone's easy to buy, the internet is universal and accessible. Anyone can basically do what I'm doing, at least in like the textbook version of that. Like, they can fit all the quality, they can make this kind of video. The commentary style, the personality, the being willing to stick with it for years and years until you actually make it somewhere, all those other elements that eventually lead to how I got here and so on, that's all a bit different. But the actual, like, building blocks, the basic elements of this are very democratized and accessible, and there's a very low barrier for entry. And this is an example of that kind of going away, and this is a thing that keeps happening. And it was kind of related to SOPA and other elements too, but just on a regular basis, there's more and more regulatory elements and more competitive elements that kind of squash lower end users and make it harder for them to compete or have a chance to do what they want to do as larger channels, basically. As larger people that have more resources basically still get to thrive. And this would be an example of that, because there's people who might be looking to be on YouTube now, but they maybe have like 1,000 subscribers or 100 subscribers, and it's not even vaguely sustainable, but they're doing it as like a hobby, and maybe it'll go somewhere sometime, and maybe one day they might be one of the future people that has millions of subscribers and is actually kind of a memorable tentpole of the society, of the community. But they're going to potentially be squashed if this goes this way, because they just won't be able to make content. YouTube will just not allow their content on their website, and they won't be able to afford the kind of mobility that other YouTubers might be able to afford as part of their job. Like the idea of just, oh, well, this country's not supporting this job anymore, I'll just move countries. Like, that kind of stuff is often not entirely fair. I don't know if I was actually supposed to follow this guy, but I just kind of want to see where he's going now, because I kind of made him. Look at him go. So it's plenty scary, and some of the stuff hasn't really materialized and some of it has, but this is really specifically being put in place by the EU, where all member states would have to incorporate it into their laws within a year or two, and like that's pretty explicit. Whether or not it gets hobbled or dampened in some way is hard to say, and whether or not they deliberately pull back. And yeah, there's the idea that maybe it'll be such a minor change that no one even notices, or maybe it'll be so drastic that it fundamentally changes the landscape of the internet for a while, or maybe we even hit a point where maybe they'll even realize their mistake and pull back and rewrite or undo this entire change. I don't know what the future holds, but what they're saying it is, if you take the actual terms at their face, it's really worrying. I think this is somebody else's quest. They're just stacking now, because MMOs, you're unique in an MMO. Look how unique I am and special, as my quest monstrosity is doubling up on another person's quest monstrosity. So it's worrying. What else was I gonna? I had another thought in mind. I'm trying to. I lost my segue to a thought I was thinking about. Going back to the original question, I actually didn't think about that until you brought it up, which is the idea of them regulating everybody that makes content on games from the EU. Like, that's a whole thing to think about that I didn't really consider, and I don't know what form that would take. Like, what does happen if the game itself originates from the EU? Does it become content that you can't create content about anymore? I'm actually not altogether sure. Like, if they sell that content in the United States, then this is where you hit the limits on my awareness and capabilities, and what you need to, where you start needing to refer to actual experts on some of the stuff. Is I get the feeling that if you sell something in the United States, that once it's being sold here and it's made its way here, then it's based on our laws at that point, I would imagine, but I don't know. I need a drink. Talked too long without drinking again. But I don't know, because I would imagine that if a product reaches here, then its uses are subjected to our laws as opposed to its origin country laws. But I don't really have an answer there, especially since the internet makes everything more confusing. But yeah, maybe. Maybe content from Quantic Dream and CD Projekt Red and so on and Daedalic might be ripped off of everyone's YouTube channels all of a sudden, which would be a real bummer, because that's a lot of that's hundreds of videos. That's not an yeah, EU countries. That's not, let me double check something actually. I'm just double checking some countries here. I want to be sure about this. Is CD Projekt? Yeah, they are Polish. That's what I thought. Yeah, and Poland is in the EU. I was double checking that because I get a little more confused the closer you get to Russia about which ones are in the EU and so on. Like I was thinking in the back of my head, like, if that did happen, would I be allowed to cover Stalker and stuff like that, or that list, or like do various Eurojank things that I'm thinking of covering because they're always amusing? Do they just go away? Can I not cover Stalker? Can I not cover Gothic? Do I lose all of my existing videos on Pathologic and Elex? Do I lose my ability to cover Pathologic 2 and so on? I'd probably lose thousands of videos if everyone from Europe was not applicable, but that's a way muddier thing, and I have not heard anyone talking from any sort of expert perspective and making that kind of claim. But I'd be interested in knowing the source of why you're bringing that up, and or if it's just a connection because, like, you know, they're from the EU, so that's how it works. But I don't know. That's attacking the question from a whole different direction that I don't actually know what to say about. But yeah, if aside from that concern of content just vanishing, which, man, if that kind of thing happens, you'd have to, like, you definitely would have to, like, manually research the origin country of every single game you ever play and try to tell what things are from. And you might not cover certain games because the company isn't sufficiently transparent about its country of origin or something like that, because that kind of stuff could be the kind of stuff that gets you into, like, legal trouble and whatnot. Yeah, that's not fun to think about on top of everything else. As far as how I would do financially, it's almost impossible to tell, in part because of the fact that it's really, like, the basic elements of how this whole thing will be implemented are still uncertain. But looking, like, if we just go with the idea of, like, oh, what if all of the EU just gets shaved off of my my YouTube, and then by extension probably my Patreon, since who's going to support the Patreon of a channel they can't watch? it's hard to say, but if I just go with 25% lost, it would essentially involve just undoing all the progress that was made over the last few months, where I had the big Patreon push and made progress and so on, which is all the more reason for me to make a public Q&A video promoting the series. So yeah, let's do a little plug here. If you like the idea of getting this kind of video every week, please consider supporting me for $1 or more on Patreon every month, because that's how this Q&A is in the bare minimum tier along with voting on the next Patreon game. This was me trying to make a more useful, more consistent thing on the Patreon, because the voting can happen once every 2 weeks, or it can happen once every 3 months or something, based on how long the game is that's chosen. So if I do a Q&A series on the Patreon, there's consistent content that's Patreon exclusive that makes the value of supporting on Patreon more significant in a different way, in addition to credits, which some people care about and some people super don't, and so on, because there's the credits at the end of the videos and so on. That's what this is, and that's just as a basic self-preservation thing, I should definitely promote this, because I don't know what the future holds. And yeah, like having all the progress I made over the last few months on my Patreon get kind of taken away by losing 25%-ish of my Patreon and YouTube support would be a real bummer, especially since I just moved and increased my costs, because that was kind of the point, is to improve quality of life and working environment by getting Patreon support. Like, that's the point of having a job and so on, more or less. So that's not great news. I think the main solace I cling to on this subject is the idea of it potentially taking years for them to incorporate this change. So if they do take years to incorporate it, that gives me more time to grow, and my audience and support has always grown linearly to exponentially. I've been making good progress, generally speaking. So if this does happen, and I have to say goodbye to a huge chunk of my audience, it will hopefully happen far enough from now that I have time to grow by more than I lose, I hope. But that's really hard to say, especially since it's hard to say if like YouTube will just panic immediately and start making changes the moment that it's passed and finalized, as opposed to waiting for individual countries. Although given the financial incentive of being able to make money in the meantime, I would imagine that they would probably hold out on making changes on a country by country basis as long as possible until each individual country finalizes their individual laws on the subject, because in the meantime they can keep making money off of the viewers of said country. So hopefully it would be a slower and slightly more gradual catastrophic change. But yeah, between this and global warming and a few other things, it's really fun to think about the future lately. Yay. What I've got to do is I've just got to be massively ultra famous and make my mega bunker where I can just have infinite food and resources and be safe from all changes to the environment or the economy. And I'll just be one of those stereotypical rich people that just rips themselves away from society and then doesn't care anymore about the downfall. And then I'll die from the plague, like in that Edgar Allan Poe story where all the rich people locked themselves off from society, and then they all died anyway. Whoops. I don't know where this question mark is. Is he inside the building or outside the building? I can just run around and kill people until I find him, I guess. But yeah. Yay. Article 13. If you know, oh, there he is. If you know about it a lot, please talk about it in the description and share information with other people and have nice long conversations about this. And if you're just hearing about this now and you're in the EU, which are actually affected by this, then you've been slacking a bit and should have probably heard about this from all the people yelling about it. But also, isn't that fun to think about the idea of people making massive changes to the world around you without you finding out about it along the way? Doesn't that make it feel like you're being fairly represented when that kind of stuff happens and you don't even get to find out about it? Where are these schematics? Yay. I'm trying to think if there's any other subject I need to cover on this subject, because a lot of it's out of my hands, unfortunately, and maybe I should have talked about this sooner, but also there's not much I can do about it. Even the people that I promote this to can't do much about it, and the largest channels have largely already covered it. So a lot of you hopefully already know about this and aren't just hearing about this for the first time now. There's the schematics. But as far as resources, I know that even YouTube has one where it's youtube.com/saveyourinternet, and you can look up like the hashtag #SaveYourInternet and so on to try to get more information about this. This definitely feels like it's worse than the other times where it didn't necessarily pan out, and it's concerning. Although on its surface it doesn't directly affect me and my country, it just means losing audience members from other countries. But the internet is so awkward. The internet is so universal and non-universal, and it's like it's every individual culture separately and together. So like there's all these weird things where one country's decisions can feel like it affects everybody else's. It's kind of like how you hear about like fair use and so on to support content that I make and that other people will make. But fair use as a concept is American. So like a lot of these other countries, like if you're not American, the question of whether or not that kind of idea even protects you goes further. Like you need to look into your own particular countries, and yet implementation globally has just been fair use. It's just a thing, right? Like it's treated like it's a thing that everybody somehow has, even though it's actually a particular country's concept. And maybe that is because many internet companies like Imgur and Reddit and YouTube, I believe, and so on, and Facebook are all American. So maybe since they're based in the United States, that's the main policy that matters, and maybe that's why somehow a United States law starts to feel like it's some kind of universal world law. But it speaks to how the policies of one country can kind of bleed throughout the world and make their way around. So it'd be a little worrying to find out that maybe this EU policy might start affecting other countries outside of even the EU and so on, and that whole mess. And there's if you think about it, this is what large media companies want. Like they want more restrictions on the internet, because the democratization of the internet and the fact that so many people can just do this. Like you guys, you can do it right now. You can just make a Let's Play channel right now, just like I have, and functionally it'll be the same as far as like content goes and everything like that. This microphone is not expensive. It's the AT2020 USB on Amazon. I don't know if they make it anymore. I think they might have replaced it with a new model now or something, but like this is not expensive. Before this I used a Snowball, which was also significantly not expensive. Both of them are often on sale for half price. OBS is a free program. My Elgato is admittedly not cheap, but it's not expensive either. And you can frankly start a channel without doing console capture anyway. In fact, Bird still, after all these years, does not have a console capture card. His only console game on his channel is Super Smash Brothers, which he has because he's just uploading my footage on his channel. Like I just give him the footage. I'm like, here you go, because we're playing together, but he can't record it. Like you don't need to be able to record consoles. You could just get a microphone and a decent computer and go. And many of you already have that second step, and maybe even the first step for other reasons, out of the way. Like that low barrier for entry has always been one of the beautiful things about the internet, and that's threatening. It's very threatening to large media companies that like some random asshole can make a video in his room where he talks about the news, for example, and then over the course of years becomes, you know, what Philip DeFranco is right now. And like that's all a thing that exists completely outside of the previously established ecosystem. And like that's like Let's Players just are people that just play video games and make voices and say things and so on and do what I'm doing, or things utterly different from what I'm doing. And then people just decide to watch them, and just because by the virtue of that, hey, people are watching this, it then has an intrinsic value that then generates money because of the viewership itself, because if there's views, there's money. And that is all threatening to large companies that had a stranglehold on how the system works and don't want subversions of their system. And so these kinds of people will absolutely, just like how they went after trying to police the internet and trying to go after Netflix and trying to affect the flow of the internet and the free internet, they'll also make these kinds of approaches where they try to lobby for these kinds of changes to happen. And they're very, very powerful, rich companies that have the resources to look into lobbying entire countries to make certain choices. So these kinds of things that squelch anyone that doesn't have the resources to fight it are just another thing that can reverse the progress that the internet's essentially made. And that's just a huge bummer. I also have no idea where these shells are I'm supposed to be going after. So that's not going well. So yeah, it's all doom and gloom, and hopefully it's all a fluke somehow, or hopefully if it does go bad, I have time to outrun it a little bit and not be totally damaged by this. I will say that I habitually don't spend money out of a vague fear, because I don't have the most massive faith in myself and my ability to function as an adult with like taxes and like medical insurance and car payments and all this other stuff. Like I'm still, even though I've been doing it for a while, it just vaguely makes me nervous. So because I don't want everything to collapse around me, I constantly am just careful enough with my money. And oh, there we are. That I may have enough saved to kind of make things work out. I'm not like I'm very careful not to be going month to month when I do things like this place is gonna blow up, you better get to the exit. Immediately get stunned by guy. That was not a very long jump. Running. This is oddly tense. Almost like the topic I've been talking about. Oh, cool. That's me dying because I didn't escape, probably. Oh, cutscene. Never mind. Yeah, it's me running away from Article 13. Thematically consistent imagery. Look, it's the EU burning down. It's all on fire. The memes are running out, burning. Go back. My baby's still in there. That got dark. I don't fucking know. But yeah, when I make scary changes like increasing my rent by moving to a better location, I'm generally being careful and not just like being like, well, I have slightly more money, I better immediately just fucking pedal to the metal and you spend all of it. I'm always paranoid that this entire thing is going to come crashing down as far as my financial situation goes, so I'm careful with my choices and moves and all that. So I'd probably have, if I suddenly was in the red and making negative money, like my income dropped to below my expenses, for example, for a while, I have like some cushion probably where that would basically be like my account trending down for a bit, but I wouldn't be immediately doomed because I've made somewhat reasonable financial choices and so on. There's also been the ongoing thing where like the growth of my channel and the growth of my YouTube and my Patreon are not of a sufficient scale where I can like just make the leap to be like, I have my own apartment or in this state because the state's so fucking expensive, or I'm ready to move to like Seattle or something and hang out with the Brian J and Bird, which I realized both live in Seattle, and that sounds cool because also Seattle's expensive. So since I'm not ready to make the big leaps, this upgrade I did by moving is an upgrade and it is more expensive, but it's not the 100% of what I'm currently financially capable of. It's more like it was something that I could do, but the point of moving forward is to make progress until like I can, you know, have my own place ultimately, where this is an intermediate step because I could afford it. Trying to articulate why I even brought this up. how do I put this? So yeah, what I was trying to get at is that there's a side effect of being in these kind of intermediate states where my income grows above the exact cost of my current living situation, but is not high enough for like the next step I'm trying to make it to, is that I can kind of start to save whatever the balance there is, the in-between. And so like those kinds of in-betweens stack up, and that helps me have a cushion if something goes wrong, like these kinds of things. And it also eventually leads to me making monetary, like leads to me making not like permanent living situation upgrades, or more like actual like hardware upgrades or things that I change about what I can do. Like an example of that being that like I have that milestone on Patreon. I'm like, hey, if we hit $2,000 a month, I'm gonna get an HTC Vive, and maybe even also a PSVR or something. Like I'll just dive into like, okay, now we can cover VR content. Let's look at that next Cyan Games project. Let's look at all those VR escape rooms. Let's look at From Software made a VR game only. I think it's a VR exclusive game on PS4, like that kind of stuff. Those are the kinds of changes that I can look into doing in the meantime, because my income can't support the next big leap that I want to go for in my living situation. But I have like I have this margin, and that margin can then go towards projects like that, like getting a Vive and stuff like that, which I'm still working on unpacking, and the amount of space I have around my environment. But once I get this cleared out properly, and all these excess bags of clothes and crap that made the move that haven't been sorted through properly, then I'll have like about a 6x6 open area in this room. Like I think I can lay down in both directions, which is amazing. And with that amount of space cleared out, that would mean that I can cover room scale VR potentially. Like not just like sitting facing a computer and having a VR headset on, but actually like walking around within a limited space and stuff like that. Like those are the kind of changes I can hopefully make. And I hope that my EU audience members will still be around to see it. Yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen. If you're in the affected country, you are extra incentivized to do the available, like look into the available research, find out what you can about what's going on, find out how much this stuff matters to you, dive down, because this is affecting your internet. And if you're the kind of person who will watch a 2-hour Q&A video of your let's player on the internet, you're probably someone who kind of likes watching internet content, and this might have a direct effect on how you consume content, which is both your entertainment and, on one level, also kind of how you gain information at times. And that's the really scary shit to me. That stuff makes me uncomfortable. And then also, yeah, maybe it is worth looking into VPNs and whether or not that might be able to circumvent these kind of problems on a user basis, and also maybe whether or not that stuff's legal, or whether or not you'd be punished for using them. I don't know. Yeah, this video is not sponsored by NordVPN, because I still don't have any sponsors, partly because sponsorships make me nervous as a concept, but also because they're not exactly beating me down at the door. But yeah, accidental almost endorsement of VPNs and all that. Talk to somebody who knows more about them than me. I think that's about it for the Article 13 question. I'm trying to think of every single avenue to discuss, because it's potentially a big subject, but that'll be it. I think I'm going to move on to someone else now. And yes, this is about as rambly and unorganized as these tend to get, and I basically just keep, and there's always that death throw at the end where I kind of spiral for a few seconds and kind of repeat myself a bit, and then I'm like, I think that's all the things I can say. And then I finally move on. All right, so just as a last thought, I'll try to pepper the description with comment. Like I'll try to pepper the description with links to some sources and so on, just so you can keep going down this rabbit hole if you want to keep going. But definitely take a look on your own too. So Sage Genesis asks, I've been playing tabletop RPGs since the mid-90s, and I'm curious about your opinions and experiences with them. How did you get into them? Which game was the first? What other games have you played? Are you any you particularly like or dislike? Or fun anecdotes you can share? So my first experience with tabletop ever was... Jeez, how did I get that book? I think I looked up... I think I was hanging out with, like... It had to be middle school. It had to be like 7th or 8th grade, timing-wise, because I never saw those people in high school, I thought. Or most of them, I think. Yeah. I think around, like, 8th grade or something, I was getting invited to join a tabletop campaign, which really, I didn't even know the idea. I don't think I even knew tabletop RPG or tabletop as being a category. For me, it was basically just Dungeons and Dragons, you know, the one tabletop game, basically. And I didn't know about versions at the time either, but when I look back at it, I'm almost certain it was version 3.5. I think. Basically, I had this dungeon, I had the player's handbook. I think I rented it from the library, actually. And I just spent... Like, actually, I went on a camping trip. I have this specific memory of being in a tent with a flashlight, just looking at this player's manual. And I had my pencil, and I was working on my little character, and I was just researching how to make a character. At the time, I thought quarterstaffs were really rad shit for weapons, so I was making a monk that fought with a quarterstaff, and I was all enamored in the idea of, like, wow, it attacks multiple times at the same time, which seemed neat. Which I'd never played D&D before, so I didn't even know how good or bad it was. That whole mess. I had that campaign go, because that was not great news. That, as far as why the quarterstaffs, it basically speaks to the fact that, like, Gambit has basically always been my favorite superhero design. Not necessarily my favorite superhero character, because I had limited exposure to any superhero media until it started becoming a bunch of movies, starting with the X-Men movies and everything, which I've largely watched most of that stuff. I've missed half the DC movies. I've only watched Man of Steel, and then I was like, this universe is bad. I don't want to watch this universe anymore. But then I kind of got suckered into watching Suicide Squad, because this one will be different, right? Oh no, it was worse. And then I saw Wonder Woman, which was actually all right. But I've seen all the... X-Men came out when I was like 10? So, like, I saw all of those in the original series, and the first 2 remakes. I have not seen I have not seen Apocalypse, because it didn't seem like it'd be great, and I was not motivated. Superhero fatigue. But I've always liked Gambit as a design. I didn't really know his character necessarily. But this guy with quarterstaff throwing exploding cards is just a really cool idea. And then learning that he can put his kinetic energy into things besides the cards too. It's not just, he doesn't just throw exploding cards. And the ways they implement that is really cool. Like, I was reading a Gambit comic where he's about to do a train heist all on his own. And he's chewing gum before the train heist. And you don't really think much of it. But at the end of the train heist, he's captured, he's like pinned to the wall, and someone's like, what are you gonna do now, Gambit? And then Gambit spits the gum in his face. Like, cause the guy's like taunting him face to face, and then Gambit spits the gum directly in the guy's face, which explodes. And I'm like, and then the guy goes flying out of the train. I'm like, all right, that was a setup and a payoff that I didn't even realize was a setup and a payoff, because a good writer can use that guy's power in such an inventive way that the setup and payoff could be hidden, because you don't know what he's going to use his power on in the first place. He's a fun design. Good visual design, lots of variants that look neat, and also the fun thing of being a Louisiana Cajun, which is not, you know, it's a way of getting away from being another generic, like, stereotypical like average white man, which is the usual character. The more variety, the better. In RPGs, in comic books, in media, it's just all good. It's a variant away from just being the default. But because of Gambit, I always liked quarterstaves, and so I would actually be at my dad's upholstery shop, and I would use like the cardboard tube that was on the inside of the material, and the material comes in like 6-foot tubes, so you get this really long cardboard tube, and you could use it like a kid could use that as like an imaginary weapon and all that. Like as a kid, I never played with toys really. Maybe I did when I was a really young child, but I've never had a toy collection really. I had video games and I had media, but aside from that, it was always like going around the environment or going through nature and looking at bugs and stuff like that, or like doing stuff like this where like my brother and I would fight each other with cardboard tubes and stuff like that, or airsoft guns. It was never really like, I never really would like grab an action figure and like role play a story with it or whatever. Like I never got that. But weirdly, yeah, like that was like, those would be like me doing moments of sort of role-playing this weapon that I like. And you'll even see early on in a lot of these games, like anything from Dynasty Warriors to what am I thinking of? Anything from Dynasty Warriors, or even Dark Souls or Lords of the Fallen or whatever, like, or inevitably with like the Surge even, yeah. I'll inevitably need to try the staff or spear weapon. Like I beat Dark Souls for the first time using the lightning spear you get in Sen's Fortress. I always lean towards spear weapons and rapiers, and like it had like a trajectory where first it was quarterstaffs, then it became kind of spears because the defensive hide behind the shield nature that makes sense, to rapiers being like this precise version of a sword and everything. But like my favorite characters in Dynasty Warriors would always be like Ma Chao and Zhao Yun and Guan Yu, and all the characters using large like staff, halberd, spear weapons. It was just always a preference. I've never liked axes and hammers and even swords that much when I have the option of instead using quarterstaffs and spears. And it's totally, part of it's probably some dumb weeb thing of just watching the crazy weapon go flippity flippity flippity, then have way too many motions and so on, and just the cool appearance of that kind of thing. But it does not have anime connections as its origin for me being interested in it. It's definitely a direct connection to specifically Gambit, because I did have access to, I want to say, the first 2 VHS tapes of the show. Like very limited exposure, unfortunately. I'm about to die. Am I about to bleed out, or am I bleeding out right now? No, those are all good things. Let's just take a rest. That was a very large aside for just talking about the staves. But anyway, but it speaks to like that I was like pouring into this character that I thought was neat and everything. It was a shallow character in that I didn't have any kind of personality designed for said character. It was just I was just making schematics basically, but it was still a time to potentially make my own version of this thing that I liked. And being a kid, you get to really get over invested in it and everything. The campaign itself, when it finally happened, which it took forever, was basically a disaster. We went to like some game store, and like they're like one of those ones that has like a back room where you play the games basically, and it was a bunch of people I didn't know, and the dungeon master was like, I think the dungeon master was the only person I knew, or maybe the person I knew was one of the players, but I only knew one person in the entire game. Everyone else was just some larger group I'd been thrown into. So already I'm out of my element because I'm bad at dealing with large numbers of people. I like to meet new people one at a time. I like to be in a group of people I know and then slowly just drip feed new people into said group, as opposed to being thrust directly into a notion of confusing new people that I have to figure out. But it wasn't me that messed this up. It was that the dungeon master wasn't ready to dungeon master, which, thinking back at the I always think of this as being their fault, but to some extent it's kind of just the fact that they were young, because everyone was young, and you have to like there was a failure of appreciation of the fact that a dungeon master has to improvise and has to react to the players and not just have a story to tell. And this dungeon master unfortunately very much had a story to tell, Like they had a plan for what the campaign was going to be, and people immediately started poking holes in his plan and ruining his story in his eyes, and he got very sour about it and wasn't happy about it, and it very quickly fell apart, and I think there was no more of that. Quickly before oh, my healing went away. Uh-oh. Thankfully I can do this. Yeah, it's just he had I don't remember the specifics, but he had like some kind of riddle or trap or something and various other things, and like there was a player that just knew the game better that was just immediately ruining every single thing the guy wanted to set up, because he just knew how to poke holes in every little thing, and it fell apart, and people were unhappy as far as I could remember, and then it just never happened again, and I never saw any of those people again, so I can't even recall a single person's name or face, because I never really met them long term. That was basically that. Can I wear any of these things yet? I should. I need to have better gear. I'm dying. It hurts. Everyone's hurting me. Oh. That was way better. That'll work for now. As we sit here and eat. He's having a good time. So that was my only encounter with any tabletop for a very long time, until college. And by college, I even mean late college. I knew it existed as a concept, and I learned more about it from afar. But as somebody who did not grow up playing CRPGs either, it was largely alien to me. All through my childhood, I played like Rareware games and action platformers and combat games and shooters and stuff. Like a lot of Rareware games, a lot of like Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, and weirdly, I mean, like they did make a surprising variety of games that were still all the same company, so you could actually get a lot of different uses out of the same company's games, and that was neat. It wasn't until, let's see, my first thing I got really into that would kind of count as an RPG by video gamer standards that are wrong, was probably Diablo 2, which I played a lot for a while. I played Diablo 2 nonstop for like a year, then I played Halo 2 nonstop for like a year, and then I had my first encounter with RPGs and video games where you actually get to roleplay a bit, which was when KOTOR came out. I found out about KOTOR and I totally just bought it because it was Star Wars and looked like it was a good Star Wars game, because I had been playing various Star Wars games along the way and watching the prequels, which I still liked at that age because I was 13 or something. And I'd not, in fact, the prequels were still coming out when KOTOR came out, huh? 1999, 2002, 2000, yeah, KOTOR came out before the third one, at least. I am melting, by the way. My character's having a bad time. It's probably because I'm doing a Q&A. Drink. But from KOTOR, I went directly to KOTOR 2, Jade Empire, Mass Effect Trilogy, and Dragon Age Trilogy, and that kind of brings us here. And of course, Oblivion and Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. So those games all sort of laid the groundwork for starting to understand the idea of a game where you actually role play to some extent. They're all very limited video games where you make really limited choices, the best of which the best options probably being provided by Fallout New Vegas, but the other ones, at least, you know, they try, but they get more, there are various levels of restrictiveness. You have to be this character or that character. Are you a Jedi or a Sith? Are you a renegade or a paragon? That kind of stuff. Do you sacrifice yourself, or do you make your friend sacrifice yourself? Let's just ignore the fact that there's a guy immune to radiation standing right next to you. It goes, this is your sacrifice. Fallout 3's ending is terrible. Fox ruins that ending completely. And he's not even a DLC character. He was there the whole time. So I started to grow and understanding. When I play various CRPGs on this channel, you'll sometimes hear me refer to the fact that I encountered Fallout 1 at some point, and I encountered Morrowind at some point, and I encountered, I'm just trying not to fight anyone on the way out, Dungeons and Dragons, the Temple of Elemental Evil, and others like CRPG-ish games when I was younger, but I didn't understand them. So my encounter with them lasted minutes, basically, where I was like, what the fuck is this? It was kind of like when I played Myst for the first time when I was like 4 years old, and I genuinely didn't understand that it was a video game because I was so young and did not know, and it was just on my grandma's computer, and they didn't understand it either. It was just some popular thing that people had. So like that's actually one of the things I want to get to at some point. I want to get to I have the Temple of Elemental Evil on GOG, and I want to get around to playing it sometime just to confront my childhood of being inept at CRPGs. Because at the time when I saw a top-down RPG, I thought, oh, Diablo 2. I like Diablo 2. And so when they didn't play like Diablo 2, I didn't know what to do at that point. Was basically that was a little cool moment where he's fighting all the things when I came up. Except these ones are clearly alive. Whoops. It glitched. So if I saw a top-down RPG that didn't turn out to be Diablo 2, basically, then I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have the vernacular prepared, the gamer grammar. I wasn't ready. But over time, BioWare RPGs and a couple Bethesda games leaned me towards understanding this stuff better. And now I'm more in the crazy realm where I'm playing Pathologic, and now I'm playing, what was I thinking of? Damn it, I lost it. Oh yeah, like Divinity and Wasteland, and Morrowind finally. Went back to that. Because admittedly I bounced off Morrowind the first time because of the graphics, because I played Oblivion, and I was like, oh, this is neat, and then I ran out of Oblivion to play, so I'm like, well, let's play the previous one that has werewolves in it, cool. And then because I still liked werewolves back then, and then I tried Morrowind for 20 minutes, and I was like, this is a visual change, and me as a 16-year-old is not ready for it. But by the time I reached college, what happened is we were about to have summer break, and I wanted my group of friends in the geology department to actually hang out during summer break instead of just not doing that, which we did last year. We just disappeared for 3 months and then all came back like, hi everyone. It's like, what? Why are we doing this? We hang out all the time. We have fun with each other. Why do we just disappear to the corners of the earth the moment summer break starts? And so I came up with the idea of like, let's meet up and do like anything really. I didn't have a plan. Like we could watch movies, we could play board games, or we could play video games or something. And the early encounter we played, I think we played Apples to Apples and then Mario Party. Like it was really like whatever we had on hand, basically. But then like it started to evolve. Like we would start getting more and more games into the mix, or we would find out about other people having various games that they could contribute to the pile. And sometimes I would go to like Barnes and Noble just to find some game somewhere and then bring that like to the next tabletop, which is why I have a copy of Elder Sign, for example. Is we'd be like, hey, let's just play this at the next one, and we would just come up with things to do. But eventually it became a more consistent, stable thing, which is that we just started playing D&D. Somebody introduced that to the situation. It was my friend Sid, which you can see in the Unfairnament series, and it was Jake and Ben and a few other people. But if you watch if you watch season 1 of Unfairnament in particular, you see a bunch of the people that would be in the D&D campaign. I think Carissa was there too. I think these people have very limited exposure to the channel, but they are in that show at the very least, because that was the same group. And I think we played a few different campaigns here and there. I think one of them kind of was a packaged campaign from a book, while another one was somebody's invention. And in particular, I think we even did something similar to what happened in Grave of Man, where we converted a cast from one campaign into another campaign. Basically, a dungeon master didn't want to go, kind of was petering out, so somebody else wanted to take over, but they had their own campaign idea. And so we had all of the characters all the characters from one campaign just woke up in captivity one day with like exploding battle royale collars on them that were going to kill them if they didn't obey this particular plan, and that's how they were forced into this particular scheme for that. I'm going to die. That's how they were forced into that particular scheme for that kind of campaign, was that they were literally hijacked and kidnapped into a different campaign because the previous campaign was ending because the DM didn't want to do it anymore. I think that DM was actually... I think that was Sid actually wanted to give Jake a taste of his own medicine because Jake kept min-maxing and not really role-playing and just focusing on winning the mechanics of the game and making broken characters and stuff like that. And so Sid wanted to make Jake deal with being the dungeon master for a while and, you know, maybe make it a learning experience. And that was shown by the fact that I think Sid started then breaking his character just to mess with Jake's campaign. And I started messing with Jake's campaign on accident, basically, because that was when I discovered being a druid. And yeah, druids are versatile. But we were all kind of collectively punished for letting Jake DM because he would make broken monsters that were stupid. And I don't think he understood the idea of DMing because he would just like be cruel to the players, basically. Like is really back and forth. Like admittedly there was a part in Sid's campaign where I lost my hunter. I had my orc hunter that I lost to mummy rot, and from what I've heard, mummy rot's supposed to be a very slow proceeding thing, but he had me die in like seconds from mummy rot, which might have been a mistake on his part or something. But that was a rough, weird thing of just losing my character permanently to a trap, basically, after a bunch of campaigns. But I kind of enjoyed the chance to try making a new character anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal to me. But in particular, like at one point Jake made a character where it was some mass of tentacles or something. I don't remember. I think we tried to open a chest in the swamp, and the chest was like a mimic, and it just spewed tentacles out, and all of those tentacles all were wielding individual weapons from inside the chest. So it was just this mass flurry of arms holding weapons, and so it had so many attacks per turn and so on that, like, with our group of 6 people that were fighting it, I swear every turn took an hour to calculate, basically, between the monster's many attacks and figuring out what the players were going to do with any amount of like grappling and individual crazy things that were happening with each player, that like it was such a mess that like every turn of the fight took like an hour to calculate. And then that one fight was basically just the session, which was not the most satisfying thing to do. Definitely got a more of a compassionate side from Sid than Jake as DMs, because he wasn't just randomly punishing people. In particular, a really rough thing that happened is that we were hanging out with we were bringing in Lewis, which is also from Infernement and a few other things, and Lewis was going to make a new character and join the campaign, and he spent like all morning working on a character, and then that character just kind of warped in the middle of this thing as like a red shirt, basically, is what functionally happened. It was in the middle of the exploding collar, you have to do the campaign, which kind of says its own things about the Jake campaign, I guess. But Lewis, as like a level 1 character, just shows up in the middle of the situation. We are trying to siege we're trying to siege this goddamn orc fortress, where all along the top of the wall there's orcs with crossbows shooting at us, and we're very far away, and it's just a very dangerous situation. And it's actually, despite what happens to Lewis in the story, it's actually one of the more memorable and entertaining encounters I've had in D&D. It's one of the ones that I've referred to in other times where I'm asked to refer to something about D&D. But this was when I was playing as a druid, and Sid was some unknown turtle spellcaster creature that just always seemed to have a bag of tricks that he was not willing to share until the identity of, until they just were suddenly employed. He liked to have surprises. So we had this fortress that we had to storm, and it was like 120 feet away or something, that was far enough away that it would take multiple turns to even get there for most people. And that was a whole struggle in its own, because they were shooting at us, and there was enough of them that even if they didn't have the best hit chance or something, they were definitely hitting. So immediately on the first turn, Lewis's character dies. Like, his first turn of combat in his first session of D&D ever, and Lewis's character dies. And I imagine that, like, other tabletop people might, like, just wave that away. Like, just a little bit of compassion as, like, a DM. You might be like, nah. And you wouldn't tell the players, because you don't want to be like, I'm actually giving you plot armor. Like, the whole point of rolling dice behind a guard is that you can kind of hide what happens exactly sometimes and fudge the numbers sometimes to make the game better. That's kind of one of the nice things about it being run by a person instead of a computer. And I imagine many dungeon masters, when incorporating a new player for the first time, would not immediately kill them on the first turn, even if the guy did roll like a crit or whatever. But Jake was a bad dungeon master, and in part because of the fact that he often seemed to view it as winning, which is not the correct way to view any part of dungeon mastering. You're not competing with the players. You're telling a story and coming up with something interesting for them to do. These are not meant to be fought. That I realized at the last second, those were not normal enemies. That is the Alliance town in the area, and yeah, that's why you don't just run straight towards waypoints in games. But during this encounter, I had a great time, which is that I was my druid, and I had a travel form already. I was doing a special 3.5 variant character from the extended player manual, where you could take your druid and forego having a animal companion, which this might be confusing because I don't think animal companions were even a thing in 5, which is the campaign we did on the YouTube channel. At least not for druids. But in 3.5, I believe druids would have an animal companion normally, a familiar. But you could, in this special variant, not have a familiar and instead have expanded shapeshifting powers, which is that you had basically different rules for how much you could do it. Like with Drez, I could shapeshift like twice a day or something like that, and I was more of a spellcaster druid, so I leaned away from that. But this druid was a shapeshifter druid in specialty, and was playing a special variant that made them especially good at that. And they could you kind of just shapeshift in and out constantly, and also instead of having fixed forms, as a druid, when you shapeshift into a particular creature, you shapeshift into that creature. Like, you just gain the stats of said creature. You're a bear, you're going to transform into a level 5 bear. Look up the monster manual page for a level 5 bear, and that's your stats. With this variant that was in the extended player manual thing, or the player manual 2 or whatever it was, you actually had basically consistent forms for like you had like a travel form on land, you had a combat form on land, you had like a flying form and a aquatic form, and they would kind of be like a static one where you had like a stat block. You would write out your stats on a separate you would write out your stats on a separate page and know them and everything, and there was rules to how they worked as a character, and it was more consistent, and you could shapeshift in and out of them, I think basically infinitely. There was basically just like a transformation time or something like that. So what I did is I just transformed into my travel form wolf that had like 120 movement, which was absurd. So I just instantly, in the first turn, not only closed the gap on the keep we were running up on, but even went around the corner, so I was flanking the keep so that none of the archers on the front line could actually shoot at me because they didn't have line of sight. So they were just shooting at all my teammates, which did not have a similar solution to deal with. And there's my corpse, my weirdly human looking skeleton on my corpse. That's a weird element. So I basically was just like, deuces, this is a dangerous situation, I'm not staying here. I think slowly Sid conjured some kind of shield and was slowly moving forward every turn with the remaining party members, minus Lewis, who had instantly died. Whoops. But what I did is I used, I think it was shaped stone or something. I physically created a doorway in like the side of the keep and just made my own entrance, which was fun. So this is, some of this also leads to, I had a particular interest in Full Metal Alchemist. It was the first anime outside of like Toonami with like that was like that stuff was like Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball Z, crap like that. Full Metal Alchemist was the first thing I found out outside of that context and got really into. So I liked the idea of making characters that fit that kind of design. And actually, as an aside, there was a whole thing where I went on the Matrix Online forums and roleplayed as basically Edward Elric. That happened at one point. It was that I was excited about Matrix Online, and then I was waiting for like the launch to happen for like the beta or whatever it was, and I was on the forums and I found like an RP group, which was a whole concept I wasn't familiar with. So I made up a character that was basically just a mute Edward Elric with like the gimmick of like being able to, like, instead of speaking, they would make words appear on like a piece of like aluminum they carried around because you know, bending the spoon in the Matrix. Like that was the whole thing. Like it was a character with a specific emphasis on manipulating the environment and things around them via Matrix tricks, basically, and all that. But an interest in that stuff always leads to me on my druids incorporating abilities that let me manipulate the environment, and that feeds directly towards that interest and why I keep doing that all the time with Drez and with this previous druid that I don't remember the name of. Is I just always like the idea of like, just, you know, clap your hands together, put them forward, and now there's a door here. Like that's such a cool, fun idea. And so if I can make my character do that, then I'm like, yeah, this is fun. Just like how it's fun to play a werewolf in World of Warcraft and stuff like that. It's one of those things where you don't get a lot of opportunities, so you take them when you can. I guess we're gonna kill the infiltrators. So I make the door. I go inside this keep, and wouldn't you believe it, it's their unguarded armory. There's nobody in the room, and there's just an armory, and it's all their weapons. This will be important later. This is an important setup and payoff. As far as I can tell, this is largely accidental setup and payoff, but this is a perfect storm of cool things happening. So everyone's shooting at Sid's shield. They don't. If any of the orcs even noticed me dart past the keep in only one turn, they seem to not be reacting. They're all just peppering this giant glowing shield constantly with their arrows. I guess there'd be bolts because they were crossbows, and trying to kill the rest of my party. And Sid's holding a shield and they're moving forward. I don't know what the rules are or what shield he was using, so I can't verify if this was even legal or what, but whatever, it's a cool scenario. What happens is an orc critically fails, and we were definitely going with the rules, or the house rules or official rules, where whenever a critical fail happens, something real bad probably goes on. In many cases, like, their weapon would become... I don't actually see any infiltrators. Their weapon would become broken or dropped. A very common outcome would be that somebody would drop and lose their weapon and maybe not be able to find it for the remainder of the fight, so they have to improvise or something like that. These poor orcs, their crossbows would break when they critically failed, so the orc critically fails and his crossbow breaks, and he's like, well, shit, that was the one thing I was doing. I can't, like, punch them from 120 feet away. So he goes down to his, you know, the armory to get another crossbow, where he finds a dire wolf and several bears because I was transformed into my wolf form, and I had summoned an army of bears. And so basically their armory was a blender that would eat anybody who entered. And it became especially amazing when the third orc critically failed. Not just one, not just two, but three of them. They kept critically failing and just going down to this armory to die one by one, not knowing what they were about to get themselves into. And it was like a comic sketch. It was absurd. And I was just racking up kills at this point and actually turning out to be way more help to my team than it would have initially seemed when I abandoned them, because I'm basically killing all of the orcs despite in a weird stealthy way where both my team, like their characters at least, and the orcs themselves would like not know that that's happening. God damn, that's a scary elite character. That must be like a good hunter pet or something, like one of those rare ones. Yeah, there's no other ones around here. Weird. But that was just a grand fun time. That was basically the entirety of that scenario. There's more stuff that happened, but like there was a lot of moments where I would just use I would constantly use my druidness to just ruin traps that they had planned. Like Jake had a room. Jake had some kind of hallway where the roof was covered in spikes. And like, oh, that's weird that the roof's covered in spikes. So you're sneaking through, and you're like, what's gonna happen? Am I gonna step on a pressure plate? Like, are the spikes gonna come down at us? Like, what do these spikes mean? And nothing seemed to be happening. And then the gravity inverted in the hallway, which means which would meant that I would then fall directly into said spikes. But I had flight form unlocked, so I just turned into a bird and flew away, and I just flew down the hallway upside down. Like, this is like, whatever, I can fly. Like I was relentless at just ruining traps these sorts of ways. But something I should probably talk about is role-playing and how much this party does or does not do it. As far as I could tell, and admittedly I was also a frustration at times, I was the only person who role-played at all in the group. I often would come up with some kind of thing of like having some kind of antisocial or racist character or something, just because I wanted to have a character that didn't like the other members of the group as an excuse for why I don't speak much. Because while I was already immediately comfortable with playing a character that would make decisions in character, I was not good at dealing with coming up with things to say in character, and doing improv dialogue was all like really weird and alien to me and uncomfortable, and I would just choke up constantly, which also happened in the YouTube series. Or it's just I never felt great about that stuff. Doing it in character voice is like a whole extra thing. So I'd come up with excuses not to necessarily actively always be talking and guiding the conversations, but I would make decisions in characters. One example of me being annoying with it with Sid was that he made a campaign. This was our first campaign where I got to reuse my original monk idea that I'd played as a kid. He made like a zombie apocalypse start outbreaking in the middle of modern society, and so everyone was playing like normal-ish people kind of, and then just like suddenly, like out of the sewers, basically, like fantasy elements just kept popping up somehow. And it was like this idea that like it was like I think the idea was going to be like something Shadowrun like ultimately, where like reality, like our world and another world, are like mixing in some way. We never got a full development necessarily, but that seemed to be where it was kind of going. And Sid kind of made the mistake of not putting our characters all in one place together. So I just kind of kept walking down the street on this giant map of a city in a random direction, everybody else just immediately met up with each other, but I'm like, none of these characters know each other. I'm not going to just randomly walk into them. And in fact, at one point I came by a bar, and one of the other party members came like popping out of the bar covered in blood. So my character turned around and went the other way because there's a weird homeless man covered in blood. Like I was making sensible in character choices, which was actually kind of delaying the start of the campaign a little bit. But I was kind of challenging Sid to make an actual in-universe context reason to force us together, which I don't remember what it was, but he eventually did something that just some sort of thing. I think we ended up holing up in the same building because of the actual like masses or something, which made sense. It was true that he had basically not come up with a reason to actually force these characters together, and we also were not characters that knew each other or were even located in the same place. So story context helps. Most campaigns I play feature everyone just kind of being already in a group somehow, so that we skip that step. Like I was playing one this last year where, what was it? It was this Drow campaign that's packaged one for 5e, and where you start off as Drow slaves, and like, well, that's a really easy way to get the characters together because you've all been captured by this other force, and you have to stage an escape together and all that. And that makes that kind of stuff work. What is this here? Die by the sword increases parry chance by 100%, reduces all damage taken by 30%. Oh. Damage mitigation. Go! Click on the things, click on the things, click on the things. I should not have clicked on that one, that made me weaker, didn't it? Shit. But as far as role-playing goes, every other player was just so bad at it. They just weren't doing it, and it was really frustrating, actually. And it actually became a point of friction within the group behind the scenes, because Sid would get mad at it, and I would get mad at it. Sorry, it was time for more water. I often talk so fast and continuously during Q&As because it's not being mediated by gameplay pacing at all, and it just, like, wears it down. But what was a good example? At one point we played Vampire the Masquerade, for example, and we went into a suburban neighborhood, and I was so confused because, like, Sid was DM again, because he often was. Jake and Ben just went into people's houses and just attacked anything they encountered. Like, and Sid would be like, they'd be like, we beat the door down, and Sid would be like, you see a figure in the dark, and then like, we light it on fire and stuff like that. And like, then a guy comes running out of the house on fire, and like they kill him in the front lawn. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? I would just sit there on the lawn. I would actually not enter the building. I wouldn't go with them. I would just stand outside. Like, what are they doing? This isn't our objective. This is weird. And it's like, it was like RPG players that were raised by Diablo, basically, which is that it's one of the things where I get to where I talk about how various video game RPGs are not RPGs because they don't feature role playing. They just feature running around in an open area, killing everything, getting loot, and leveling up a character, which that's what Batman games are now. So how is that? Like, that's Darksiders and Batman and Shadow of Mordor. So like, we've got a really bad definition of RPG at this point, if that's what we're going to be counting it as. I think you can level up now in Assassin's Creed, and you couldn't originally level up in Assassin's Creed. So if you want to talk about that stuff being RPGs, which Assassin's Creed games are RPGs? Spoilers, none of them. All Assassin's Creed games have almost identical gameplay. They didn't magically become RPGs because they added certain meters or loots to the game. Like, no. But if you went into tabletop RPGs only understanding RPGs based on video games, and even worse, only understanding them based on like the ones that basically aren't role-playing games, but instead are games where you just kill things for numbers to pop up and pick up and hope that the next loot is blue, or maybe even purple, or maybe even gold. Wow, a legendary magic sword of stabbiness +2. Then that's how you end up viewing RPGs, as like you build a character with maximum stats and beat all the things, and everything you ever see must be a dungeon. And this was the epitome of that, because First of all, Jake immediately was min-maxing because he was trying to figure out, how can I break this Vampire the Masquerade game in a way where I get like a familiar that's essentially a second character, so I can basically cheat by having 2 characters instead of 1, making me twice as powerful. And like the fact that the moment we walked into this dungeon, Ben and Jake were just attacking everything. I just accidentally called it a dungeon, but that's how they saw it. Like, we were in a suburban neighborhood and they're like, oh, it's a dungeon, let's go loot the houses and fight all the things. I'm like, it's a suburban neighborhood. It's just people. You're just randomly murdering people, which, I mean, you're a vampire, I guess. But like, then they were like asking about the loot and stuff like that. And I'm like, what do you think you're going to get? I mean, you can rob their house, I guess, but like, you're not going to find like something that helps your vampire character, probably. Like, this is a weird path to go down. And they were like deriding me for not actively taking part in this, and I'm like, the fact that they're not only doing this, but they're continuing to do it after no results are really happening, and they're baffled by me not be taking part. I'm like, oh no, they have zero self-awareness of the idea that they're not in the right here, and that the thing that they're doing, they think that the thing that they're doing makes sense. That was a weird trip. I did not know what to make of that, but it would kind of keep going, because as a later example, there was a time where what was it? I had my it was my hunter that was weirdly good at stealth. There's actually a fun little side story I'll get to before I get to that. Is that I had a hunter that was he was weird. He specialized in melee with multi-attacks and everything, and using like war glaives, and he had a high stealth stat which he would employ and for thieving purposes, despite, you know, not necessarily being a thief class. There was an amazing moment where I found this massive room full of loot, and I had split from the party because I didn't trust them and also was being selfish. So we were in a dungeon and they were going their way down a main corridor, and I had like kind of vanished down a side corridor just to try to find what loot I could get that I could keep just to myself without sharing it, because that's the kind of character I was playing. And I find this massive chamber with a giant treasure chest and an apparently unconscious or unresponsive giant scorpion, which was so large that it must have been introduced to the room when it was smaller and then grown to the size of the room, and is now trapped in there indefinitely. Probably surviving, actually, on consuming all of the adventurers that try to get to that chest, if I were to guess. But it wasn't responding, so I snuck in. I'm like, let's do these stealth rolls, and I was nailing the stealth rolls. I was stealthing on the way into the room. I stealthed me opening the treasure chest and filling my pockets with whatever I could carry and stuff. And then I stealthed all the way out of the room. And then right at the doorway, one last little stealth check. Critical fail. Yay! So the thing wakes up, and it reaches out and it grabs me with its giant scorpion claw. And amazingly, but it was stuck. I was technically outside of the room, but its claw could reach through the room. But by grabbing me, its claw was then too wide to get back through the doorway. So it was basically stuck with its claw outside the room, holding me, basically grappling me to death turn by turn. And so we were doing like grapple checks, which is it's always very convoluted and confusing, and I always forget how it works. But we're doing grapple checks to see how that's going, as it's basically constricting me to death, and I have no party members to save me because I'm being a selfish thief character in that moment. Amazingly, this guy manages to critically fail his grapple check on the last turn. Like, if you look at the countdown of how many turns I was going to survive being grappled, it failed its grapple check on the very last turn to check for whether or not I was going to keep being grappled, and it dropped me. And because it's so cumbersome and awkward, it couldn't reach me anymore now that it had dropped me onto the floor, and I'm unconscious on the floor, out of reach of this giant scorpion that's like trying to scrabble at me but can't reach me, and it's like both a horror scenario and incredibly funny because I'm just like I mean I technically got away with the loot, I guess, but I'm unconscious from being mauled by a giant scorpion that also critically failed at killing me when it had no excuse not to kill me. And did it actually critically fail, or was Sid like fudging numbers to be nice or whatever? Who knows? You never know, because that's what good DMing usually is. But creating these absurd scenarios is kind of part of the fun of the whole engine and all that. That character would then later go... one point against the idea of Sid just being nice to me is that character then died of mummy rot the next session, so who knows. But the reason I was bringing this up is because it's a bad roleplay moment that came up later, which is that I had a new character that we had to introduce to the campaign because my previous one died. And so I came up with this excuse, like, well, they're in this weird jungle temple with like ziggurats and stuff like that. I'm like, I think I can come up with how to introduce a character to this scenario. And the idea was that my character would be a local druid from that area, like a lone druid that looks over that environment, and I would be spying on the party in shapeshift form as various local creatures and blending to try to ascertain what their intentions were towards this temple and towards this environment and whether or not they needed to be dealt with. Like, that would be my introduction as a character, would just basically be spying on them. And so Sid would just say every now and then, like you see an owl up on a perch or something like that. And then Ben would just fucking attack the animal, the random animal that's not attacking the party and it's just part of the wildlife. And I'm like, what? What are you doing? And it's like Ben's just using, like they're failing to acknowledge correctly the difference between like player knowledge and character knowledge. Like, yeah, you probably know that that's me and my new druid character you watched me just draw, or not draw, but write out the notes for next to you while we were like while you guys were playing and stuff, and I was making my new character and things like that. But like, you can't just be like, it's not in character just to randomly attack non-aggressive wildlife for no reason just because you're trying to like shake the druid character out of his form that you don't know he's in because it's just some form. And like that was one of the frustrating things, is like even trying to do my own characters, there would be dumb conflicts because characters would just do bizarre actions, failing to separate player knowledge and character knowledge and so on. So like, it's very hard to ever do a D&D campaign, not only because the game is so niche and weird. Yeah. So those are some of the infiltrators, but they're like, so there they are. They're kind of hard to find in the mass. Not only is the game really convoluted, although it's never as complicated as people think it is. It's because a lot of the mechanics are intuitive, and a lot of the mechanics are answered by like, well, I want to do this, how do I do that? And then you figure out how to do that. Like, everything's informed by the player driving what they want to do. So, and largely, if you don't know what to do, the dungeon master can often just say what to do or what to roll, or even make up rules on the spot instead of looking up the real ones. That's honestly kind of valid anyway. But on top of being such a difficult game to get people to play in the first place, even when you get groups together, there can be so many reasons why various members of the group are incompatible, or the dungeon or the campaign's not working and so on. And this is kind of some of that. It's like we got a group of people that were interested in the game, but it was like they were interested in the game for like the wrong reasons, because they weren't interested, they wouldn't role play, and in fact they would actively break role playing at times with moments like that where they would just attack somebody at random because, well, I know that's a player in shapeshift form. I'm like, yeah, but that's not how the game works. That kind of stuff. And so like, that was a point of frustration, but this is building to something, because we hit a point where Sid was really done with the not role-playing, and so he conspired a plan to punish this behavior, which I found interesting, which is that we had a deck of many things in this campaign, which many people know not to put in their games because it messes with everything. But this was Jake's campaign, where it was all about just jamming everything into it ever and not necessarily having any kind of coherent story. It was just a series of encounters basically. But what was it? Ben was, first of all, Ben was playing a monk, but he was also at some kind of vow, which that meant he was like double bound behavior wise. Like when you're playing a religious character that obeys a god, like a cleric or a paladin or a monk or something, like if you have a deity, that means you kind of have rules on how you can behave. At the very least, you have like an alignment that you have to behave within the alignment of, and if you break said alignment, you can end up losing your class or your powers or something like that. And he had an additional vow that put even more restrictions on him. And the deck of many things had previously created, oh, what was it? Oh, I think the weird thing that happens is that we had let an NPC draw from the deck of many things. And so the NPC, which was kind of our guide through the campaign, which was also just Jake's excuse to also play a character while being a DM at the same time, that deck of many things, that NPC had drawn a deck of many things card that had created, it had basically created a person that was loyal to them. But then that NPC died like sessions later. And so the way that manifested was that the deck of many things summon that had been tied to that NPC kind of lost it and became aggressive and disjointed and confusing, and we didn't know what to do with them. They might be dangerous, they might be crazy, they might be something else or so on, and we started having this philosophical debate about whether or not it was a person, which was actually kind of interesting to have that come up in this otherwise kind of nothing campaign. And I was really getting frustrated because I was like, well, there's like we had already subdued them and made them unconscious, and we were talking about whether or not to execute them basically. And I was like, I was talking about it being like morally wrong to just execute them and all these other things and so on. And also I was a druid, so there's some argument there, although whether or not druids care about sentience is maybe up in the air. But I was playing as a good character at least, and I was arguing this way, and I was getting really frustrated because Ben wanted to kill this character, and I'm like, what are you doing? Why do you just want to execute them? We could abandon them here if we want to, or we could see when they wake up if they have like come back to their senses or anything other thing. Like there's so many other better approaches than just executing this person because they freaked out when the person that summoned them died. And this whole time I'm making all these reasonable arguments, and Ben is just being kind of out of touch with his reaction to all this. And Sid, like fucking Emperor Palpatine, is just like whispering in his ear, like, do it, and like arguing against everything I say. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I was so frustrated because it was like, it seemed out of character for Sid as a person to be making such weird stances in general, and like bad faith arguments and everything. And I was getting really frustrated in real life a little bit as a result, because it wasn't just like he was role playing, because it didn't fit his character either. So I didn't know why he was doing this, where he was trying to convince men to do this. And what he was doing is I found out later during Sid's smoke break what his plan was and how this was all a scheme on his part, because he's so frustrated with Ben not role playing and not playing by character and so on, that he was trying to convince Ben to make a choice that would completely break his character. It was on purpose. He was trying to get Ben to make this decision that would just completely like go against his alignment and his vows and so on, and just something would have to give, and he would have to lose either like his feat or his class or spells, or something was going to break about his character, because he would be like a murderer that would be out of line of how his character is supposed to work. And it's like, oh, you son of a bitch, you were getting back at him because you were so sick of DMing for him and his behavior. That unfortunately did not come to pass, because I kind of wanted to see him get the comeuppance too once I knew about that. But he after we took our break, he ultimately decided not to randomly murder someone as a monk. Funny. But yeah, like that was the level of frustration we had reached with lack of role playing. Was that had happened. As far as which engines I've played, I have played D&D 3.5, Pathfinder, Starfinder, technically, D&D 5e, and some version of Shadowrun, and some version of Vampire the Masquerade. The Vampire the Masquerade campaign was very short-lived, and I don't really know what happened to it ultimately. I think it kind of just dissolved. And I only played Shadowrun for one session, and it was not a good session. Basically, it was just thrown in my lap, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know the universe, I didn't know the characters, I didn't know what the roles meant, and so on. And we were being run. It was being run by a friend of Sid's that ran other campaigns that he did or whatever, and he was just coming in as a guest, and he was DMing it. And I got the worst possible. I ended up getting the worst possible role, which is like for a setting I don't understand, which is I was like a fixer or whatever, I forget what it's called, but I was the role that would like have connections in society and like create jobs and things like that. And I'm like, I don't know this universe, so playing that character relied on me being able to come up with information that I did not have the ability to come up with. So like that was just a whole mess. So it'd basically be like, I would basically just look to the DM and be like, yeah, what happens? What do I know? And stuff like that, like every few seconds, and is basically a character I wasn't even playing. So that was a mess. But he was clearly trying really hard to sell people on this universe and get people to enjoy playing Shadowrun, because like he was trying. He was coming up with these cinematic set pieces and fun ideas and really giving a lot of effort, and he gave this massive description of like the incredible damage and carnage that this one mega like Gauss cannon had done to a building that a player had fired, and so on, to like get them really like, you know, like the way you described the visuals to make people really hyped. It felt like the session felt like the intro on Rails chapter that's really hype at the beginning of like AAA video games, where you aren't really making any meaningful decisions and it's half cutscenes and so on. Like that's what this session felt like, and especially felt like that to me because I couldn't tell what my character was doing. I had hopes for my character in Vampire because I was playing as I often do. I made the excuse to play the beast race. There's a clan in Vampire the Masquerade that has trouble maintaining the masquerade, as they put it, because they have like animalistic features that obviously make it harder for them to blend in with human society, which is why it's called the Masquerade in the first place. That they fail to blend correctly. Hey there. Oh, I'm about to be attacked, aren't I? Oh, no, maybe not. No, I'm supposed to get the cargo? Okay. I should eat or something if I can. I'm out of food, aren't I? Shit. I'm in trouble. There it is. But I also had like additional mutations, because you can in some of those games you can take like negative and positive perks in conjunction with each other, where like if you take it's like a token system sort of, where like if you take a negative trait, you gain the ability to add any number of positive traits that add up to the point value of the negative trait you took. So it's like you can basically add cool things to your character, but they have to be counterbalanced by negative things, and it's a really interesting character creation system. And some of the ones I did were just making me further and further unable to maintain the masquerade, basically, and be worse and worse at blending in, because that just seemed like a fun idea, and I wanted to see where that was going to go. But I swear we must have only done like a couple of sessions, because I just don't remember much of anything of that campaign outside of the original, aside of that one specific example of just horrible role-playing that happened. But it seemed like an interesting universe, and from what I remember, it even seemed like it might have been somewhat less complicated than 3.5 was, which had its own appeals, because I think we tried to incorporate new players that hadn't done D&D and so on. But really the whole appeal of role-playing games, as I've probably said before plenty, is just the idea of like when you play a tabletop game, you can come up with solutions for things. And it's one of the most appealing things, is being in these problem situations and coming up with your own ways out of them, or even your own stupid things to do in them, your own dumb, funny situations. And it's often comedic, for no other reason than just the fact that there is tension that is being relieved, and dumb mistakes happening, and so on, and the constant risk of failure or great success, and a bit of randomness that makes the game less good for being like a hyper-balanced, consistent game, but better for having a dynamic story, because nobody, not the players, not the DM, has full control over what happens, because even after all the arguing out of who's going to do what and what's going to happen in the story happens, the dice still play a role in what will actually succeed, and so on. And that makes it very amusing, and it's what keeps the experience fresh to a shocking degree. And the only unfortunate thing is just that, like, when you have that, because you're getting a bunch of people together that have to be together, and it's often just whoever's willing to play the game more so than like who's the closest friends. Any large group of D&D characters, like I basically never finished a campaign. Like, admittedly, they're not short campaigns ever. They're always big sprawling things, but like they never reach the ending, because there's always some kind of friction that happens. Like in my campaign from last year that was not on YouTube, it was just my friends at my house, or really my friends' friends at my house, at my friend's house. Like there was like a confrontation and an argument, and then the DM didn't really want to do it anymore because it wasn't fun anymore after bad conflict happened. And like there's always like, it always feels like someone's gonna mess things up, and then like it's work. D&D is work, and it's fun, but like you have to be dedicated to it and consistent about it and do it for a long time to really make it anywhere. And almost inevitably something goes wrong there, where somebody doesn't jive with the other members of the group, or somebody moves, or something happens that makes somebody unavailable, and different things get messy along the way, and just there's so many reasons why the whole thing can become a mess. That's creepy. Zelfrax. And that's more or less what happened again. But there's some great moments. I have at least one really funny moment to bring up, which is that our friend Arif, which you will know from Overcooked and Lovers in a Dangerous Space-Time, was playing an idiot. He was playing a thief that had a less than 10 intelligence score, and I believe he'd never played D&D before. But we explained to him that 10 is average intelligence, so less than 10 means you're actually dumber than average and stuff like that. And he embraced that. He was playing just the dumbest man, just consistently. And it led to a lot of great moments, because he was actually really good at being in character more than you'd expect. Or at least whether or not he had a plan for his character from the beginning, he at least had like a consistent overall behavior pattern to his character that went somewhere. And what happens, he had all these stolen goods. Like we had a misunderstanding. We were on a boat, and we saw another boat, and we kept getting attacked constantly. So when another boat came up, we kind of had a misunderstanding and attacked them, and thinking it was more people attacking us, but it was probably maybe just a random group of traders, or maybe they actually might have attacked us, but still, they actually might have been the aggressors there. I don't remember. But we get to the next town, and Arif's idiot character is all like, "So, do you like he was he." How do I say this? He wanted to sell the stolen goods, you know, classic Elder Scrolls issue, you know? And we were like, well, you can't just sell it to a random person. You need to find a fence or something. And so he just goes up to a random person and is like, do you know where I can find a fence to sell all these stolen goods? And the person just points at them and screams thief, and the guards grab him. And I'm like, I swear to God, this is not happening right now. So the guards are escorting Arif to jail, and everybody else is nowhere near him. Like, I'm definitely like backing the hell up. Like, I'm not associating with this guy. I don't know that guy. But my character had a specific problem with being imprisoned, which had manifested itself in a few ways. Like, at one point when people went down a hatch, I just stayed on top to guard the top, because I didn't want to go down the hatch, because what if I got locked down there? Like, I'd specifically re-earned my freedom at the beginning of this campaign when we escaped Drow jail, so I wanted to not ever be imprisoned again, and all my decisions were motivated by that. And so I would be kind of afraid irrationally at times of those kinds of opportunities. So what had happened is my sorcerer, I was a sorcerer, I had my meta magic, which is a cool system where the sorcerers have like a point value that's like an extra, like they have spells per day like everyone else, but they also have meta magic points which they can spend to augment their spells. And since I was afraid of being captured, I kind of went with two things. One, I wanted the meta magic variant that makes spells have increased range. If you add this effect to your spell, it doubles the range of the spell. Or if you use it on a touch spell, meaning a spell that normally have to do at contact range, it becomes like a 30-foot spell. Like suddenly you can cast it at a range instead of at touch, which is very useful. And then I also had meta magic variants that silenced my spells, or not silenced my spells. It made it so that my spell could be cast without verbal and somatic components. That means it still required materials if those were involved, but it meant that I could cast a spell without the hand gestures or voice component of the spell, which would mean that I could cast spells while bound and gagged, in particular. If I was held captive, I could still spellcast with the limited pool of how many meta magic points I had. In addition to this, in my spell pool itself, my actual spells, not the meta magic, I took the spell Knock, which unlocks locks. So as you can see, I have equipped my character to not be imprisoned again, because he can spellcast while his hands are bound and he's gagged, and he has a spell that unlocks things. So there you go. He can undo. He's Houdini essentially. But the specific variation that happened here is I'm like, well, I got to get Arif out of this, but I've got to not associate with this because this is a mess. So my genius plan is to jailbreak Arif by just using Knock at range. I casted it without verbal or somatic components, so nobody could tell that I was the one casting it, so I was not incriminating myself. And I was using the other meta magic effect too to cast it at a range so that it would be cast from a great distance away, so that I could do it without approaching him. So he's just in the middle of this armed escort and his shackles fall off and he like has to run for it. And luckily for him, that's the exact moment where like a giant creature attacks the gates of the town, like which they were like right next to. So a convenient distraction, probably invented by the DM to add to the chaos when he happens to escape. Oh wait, no, I think the attack, oh yeah, no, the attack happened first. The town started getting attacked, and then I unlocked Arif's shackles secretly from a distance so he could try to escape in the chaos. But like the specific configuration of things had created a solution, and I immediately love, from my limited time with it, I love D&D 5e sorcerers. I love the meta magic system. It's really cool. It's a really good alternative to how cool druids are with all their options and stuff. And he gets to like try to scrabble away and so on. That was the main interesting part, was just that whole thing of him just immediately getting himself arrested when nobody was even suspecting him, and then me having to try to figure out how to let him free while also not incriminating myself in the process, because he's gonna get us in trouble. What was the other thing that happened? I got unreasonably lucky at times. I had entirely defensive spells for the most part. Like I had stuff like mirror image that would create multiple copies of myself, and then every time somebody attacked me, they had to roll a dice to see whether they hit me or one of the mirror images, and so on. A lot of things that were about avoiding damage, shielding myself from incoming attacks. Like I actually had the spell called Shield, which is actually like a counter spell, which is a mechanic I didn't know existed because my druid never had any. But apparently there's spells that you can cast as a reaction to other things happening. And so Shield would, like, if like a projectile or like a attack or something came at me, I could cast Shield, which would use up a level 1 spell slot, but I didn't have to use it as an action during my turn, and it would block the incoming attack by raising my AC by 10 while the attack was coming in or something. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool system, being able to like counter attacks coming in. Basically, we came up in a hut and there was 2 people there, and they wanted us to check out something in their basement, and I wasn't going in because it was a creepy hatch and I didn't want to be held captive or anything or risk those kinds of things. I'm like, they could just lock that hatch. So the rest of the party goes down there, and I refuse to go down there, and I'm just hanging out up top with these 2 people, which inevitably became Rick and Morty, just because the Doug was giving them a voice, and one of them just became Rick on accident, and then they just had to become Rick and Morty at that point, voice-wise, and that just became the imagery of the situation. They kept trying to get me to drink this tea, and I didn't want to drink their tea. When the more they insisted on it, the more I thought that it was definitely poisoned, so I was definitely avoiding that. And then we hear loud noises in the basement where all the rest of the party is, and it's because the rest of the party is now being... They stumbled upon some kind of ritual stuff down there, and I think they encountered something down there that actually was a madness point. This is a recurring mechanic in this campaign, which is that you can get a point of madness. If you see something like Lovecraftian, basically, you have a dice roll against like your charisma or your intelligence or some like mental stat to check whether or not you pass the madness test. And if you succeed, then nothing happens and you're fine. But if you fail, you gain 1 point of madness, and then one thing from a list happens to you, which is like maybe you attack the nearest person maybe you continually attack the nearest person for the next 30 seconds, or maybe you forget how to speak, or some other weird thing. Like maybe you just think your hands are on fire and you don't understand, like those kinds of things that are happening, or anything you touch lights on fire, like weird things like that start to happen. It's a fun mechanic. And what happened is they saw something, and like I think like 3 of them failed their madness check and all started attacking each other, and the Rick and Morty guys slammed the hatch shut over them to trap them in there, and then just started attacking me. So I'm running away from the hut, and somehow via combination of shield and mirror image and so on, despite the fact that they're blatantly higher level characters and should have been able to kill me very quickly, I just kept not taking any hits, and I managed to defeat both of them and get massively overpowered reward items as a result, because they were not supposed to be defeatable by my character. And then meanwhile, these people are all like, all my party members are fighting each other in this basement and attacking each other because like half of them have gone mad, at least temporarily. And I have to go down there, but I have to keep in mind the whole fear of what I'm doing here, because I've established this idea of not wanting to be trapped. So before I go down, I spend an entire turn just making sure I dismantle and damage this hatch beyond repair so the door can't be closed and locked. Like that was my character's priority for a turn before I could go down and figure out how to help my allies. D&D is fun. D&D is fun until somebody gets mad for some reason, and then friendships are ruined. Everyone jokes about like Mario Party or other things like that being friendship ruiners, but like really, D&D is such a conflict creator. And it's partly because people just have to deal with each other in a collaborative storytelling setting for dozens of hours, and you find out real fast how much you really like each other that way, and so on. But yeah, I look forward to doing it again at some point, because I miss it. But I'm so afraid to DM. It's so much pressure. So half the struggle is just finding somebody else to do that. But all the DMs like so many of the DMs I've met crack under the pressure, and they themselves want somebody else to DM. It's like it's rough. It's rough, but you definitely get fun memories out of it, as per the fact that I managed to fill up the rest of this episode with this question. So if you're new to this series, do I normally answer more questions than this? Sometimes. It's not uncommon for a question to get an hour-long answer, but other ones get 5-minute answers. It's all case by case, and how open the question is, or how much it's useful as a big podcast topic to go on forever, or if it's like a yes or no answer. There's 2 questions that are pending that I'm avoiding answering because they're just like, have you seen this content, or have you seen this YouTuber, or something like that? And I'm like, right now the answer to both is just no. And that's not a very satisfying answer, so I'm just ignoring those questions until maybe one day I see those things, and then I'll have an answer beyond no, potentially, at least. But this has been a Q&A video. We're already over 2 hours, so I should probably cut it out here. If you want to check out future and past episodes of this, just go to my Patreon and support me for $1 or more if you want to. Again, there's other perks you can get along the way, or you could just choose an amount that you think I should get, regardless of perks, which is also a thing. You can enter custom amounts. Just be very careful if you're a new Patreon person. Do not, if you customize the amount, some people are running into an issue where they get entered in the no reward tier. Make sure you are actually subscribing to some kind of reward tier, because if you go to no reward, I'm going to assume you did it on purpose, and that you don't want to be in the Patreon credits, and you don't want to vote, and so on. I think the people in the no reward tier can still see this Q&A series because I just posted to Patreon with the privacy setting set to all patrons instead of any of the specific reward tiers. So I believe even the no reward people can see that. But if you go into no reward, regardless of how much you pledge, I assume that means you don't want to vote, you don't want to nominate, you don't want to be in the credits of the videos, and so on. And I can see that potentially, like somebody who not wanting to be in the credits, and that being like for privacy reasons, that then opting to be in no reward or something like that. But just putting it out there, because it's fine if people do it on purpose, but if people do it on accident, which I'm always paranoid about because at least a few people have, then I don't want people to be like not getting what they wanted to get out of this, and so on. But this is the Q&A series. If you want to ask a question and you are a Patreon member, because it is a Patreon specific thing outside of this episode, what you do is you somewhere in the interface around like my character, like my name and my little character portrait and stuff like that on Patreon, you can opt into some kind of separate, there's like a ... or something. Like they unfortunately kind of hid it behind a menu, but like you can expand a drop down menu or something to find the message option, and then you can message me there, and you can type in a question and so on, and then that'll be in my inbox, and that'll be ready for future episodes. Generally, if I see a new face that I don't recognize asking me questions, I prioritize them first. And among the people that I've already answered the questions from, I kind of bounce back and forth between all of them to try to give people kind of equal chances and so on. And right now, there was a couple people that sent me a bunch of questions, specifically because last time I said we were kind of running out. But yeah, we don't have the deepest well of questions, so if you come in as a new question asker, and you don't ask me something wildly inappropriate or something, then there's a very real chance it'll be answered in the very next episode next week. I record these on Fridays and put them out, I usually record them on Fridays, and I put them out on most Saturdays as a weekly thing. This is a little preview, both because the Article 13 is worth talking about in a more public thing, and also because I should occasionally put one of these out as being public to like kind of promote the series and make sure that people are aware that it exists in the background as it then goes back into being hidden for the next like 20 episodes or something. So this will probably be a regular thing. I'll probably make one of these public every few months or so, just to call attention to the fact that it exists as a feature and so on. But thanks for watching like always, guys. Thank you for your continued support. Hopefully a bunch of idiots in suits don't ruin the world and the internet every month. It's really fun constantly thinking this is going to happen. Yay. And I'll see you guys next time. Oh, look. A monk with a spear.